what other applications you could imagine this sort of training pattern to be efficacious in? Like, it seems to be perfect for discovering new targets for molecular disorders in the body, things like that. Is there anyone working on that to your knowledge, or what are some of the other applications that you've
Yeah,
played
do you
with?
have an answer for metabolism?
Yeah, so that's a little bit outside of my area. I can tell you, I went to when I was in grad school. My office mate was doing computer vision work with swarms of bees, and he was trying to figure out which bees. So back in that time, there were two hypotheses, and so there was blobs of bees would fly from one point to another, and these and only say 20 of them would actually know where they were going. So this is after they found a new nest. And so at that time, there was a hypothesis that you either could have so-called gentle guides, where there are these bees flying roughly at the same speed of other bees, but they were just had a little bit of a bias in themselves. And so because they tended to want to go in one direction and they were sort of stubborn, then the rest of the group would kind of go with them. And so people like Ian Cousin and so on, who study fish, they were kind of advocates for this gentle guide hypothesis. But Tom Seeley, who was my colleagues, my office mate's collaborator, who's a really big bee guy up in Cornell, his anecdotal experience was that there were always some bees that were flying really, really fast through the swarm, much faster than the rest. And it was his thought that it's possible they could be actively steering. And I swear I'll get back to your question in just a second. But Kevin, my office mate, then was able to generate sort of some computer vision that was able to track all of the bees from like looking upwards at them, and was able to find that there was this small subgroup of bees, and they did seem to be kind of steering the colony in the way that kind of you'd expect from this sort of what they call a streaker hypothesis instead of a gentle guide hypothesis. Now, Kevin was used the exact same stuff.
They're like bee dogs, like bee sheepdogs.
That's right. Yeah, they were kind of corralling or herding the bees. Yeah, in that sort of way. Right. But Kevin was able to, along with that, also took data sets on these pancreatic cells that were kind of these these blobs that were moving around, and he would try to apply the same sort of thing to see can you predict the motion of other blobs from the motion of certain, are there ones driving the kind of collective motion and so on. And that ended up being kind of to be determined, because it turns out the bees were much, much easier to track because they have so much more inertia. They're a tiny little nut that's flying through the air that doesn't turn on a dime, and all of those things end up being much more helpful. But still, the insight was there. So I guess what I'm trying to say, there are people who are definitely looking at those. I have a colleague here at ASU who's looking at the movement of cancer cells in the brain, and because they have a thought that actually they're foraging for oxygen, and so is the oxygen availability, and actually cause them to sort of stick to certain vascular structures, and sort of trying to understand is there a highway in the brain that the cancer cells have to use. So there are definitely people who are looking at these questions. I don't look at these questions specifically. I definitely think we could apply that if we had the right data set. The broader impacts we've kind of considered have been more at even the sort of a human social level, where once we've looked at this sort of pitch drop, we can understand these social transitions over long periods of time. If we learn kind of important generalizable cues, then we could say, well, let's look at video in a mall or something like that. And are there things, things that are relatively simple? We wouldn't need to necessarily send them up to a cloud for analysis, so for privacy preservation, that might indicate that, there's something that's off nominal about this behavior that might suggest that maybe a riot is about to break out or something along those lines. And that might raise red flags and say well, maybe we need a human to look at this. So it might sort of help reduce the cognitive load on human security guards, because it would help prioritize, which videos to look at. And
it's future crime detection. It's reminds me of a Philip K. Dick book or something.
Minority Report, I think.